All right, the technical standards. I'm going to give you a little bit of information on each set of technical standards, so you have an idea of what we're talking about here. For software applications and operating systems, it requires that you can execute functions from a keyboard. For any type of, if you have some type of software, you just have to make sure that it's keyboard accessible. That's assuming that you have a keyboard. Many of our tablets and iPhones don't have a keyboard. So this particular standard would not necessarily apply. You don't want to be able to disable accessibility features. The iPhone and iPads, they have accessibility features in them where it actually allows you to touch the screen, and it tells you exactly where you are on the screen. It tells you, if there's a button to be pressed or if there's any type of text right where you're touching, it actually reads that to you. It's actually a pretty great system. A lot of blind users, say that they love that. Well, you want to make sure your software doesn't disable those type of features. Input focus, make sure you can see where you are on the screen, or at least be able to have assistive technology, be able to tell where you are on the screen. User interface elements, make sure that those have proper labeling, they have the information about those. Bitmap images, make sure they're consistent throughout the application. Textual information, any textual information on the page just needs to be available to the operating system. User-selected attributes. For example, if someone needs to change the contrast on their screen, maybe I want to change my contrast on the screen, just have to make sure your software doesn't prevent that. Animation, there just needs to be an alternate mode. If you have animation in your software or application, you just want to make sure there's an alternate means of providing the information provided by the animation. Color coding can't be the sole means of providing information. Great example of that, if you have let's say you have a form that you need to fill out and you have a green button and a red button, just make sure there's some type of textual information associated with this and you don't just say, press the green button to go forward. Color and contrast settings, if your application provides the ability to change or make colors or create colors, you just have to have multiple color options so that you can have a decent contrast between the two. So if you have an application that, say for example, does some type of word processing, or maybe you're able to take notes, a note taker application, then you don't want to just provide, say, a black background with dark gray lettering, or a gray background with light gray lettering. You want to have multiple options of colors to be able to see the difference. All right, then flashing and blinking text. This is one of those cognitive disabilities that they can actually cause seizures. Has anyone heard of the Pokemon incidents back in the 90s? Yeah, it's about 700 some kids just had seizures from Pokemon. And if you haven't heard, the Twilight movie apparently is causing seizures. I mean, not because the movie necessarily, but because there's some scenes in there with some flashing. All right. And then the electronic forms, you just want to make sure that those are labeled properly. All right. Then we have standards for web and internet. Now, this includes electronic documents, emails. This includes your websites, pretty much anything distributed through the web, through the internet, or even an internal website. All right, so pretty straightforward. You have to make sure you have alternate text for non-text elements. That would be audio, video, images. There are some cases some applets that you could use as there would be non-text elements. Now when I say audio, for audio you'd have to provide some type of transcript. For video, you would provide some type of textual description of what the video is about. Now, for multimedia presentations, there's some confusion because some people think that they're the same, audio and video are the same thing. They're not. Multimedia is actually audio and video combined. So it's treated as multimedia. And basically, you just have to have captioning synchronized captioning for any type of web video. In addition to that, you want to have audio descriptions for any of the, which is what I was mentioning here. Like I have these slides up here. If I was doing something on a chalkboard or something, or if I wasn't, me as the speaker were not describing what was happening behind me visually, then there would have to be some additional audio describing of what's going on or what's being discussed. Basically, you have to provide multiple modes of providing information. So for example, it's provided visually right now. This information is provided visually, but I am the one providing it audibly. Now, if I weren't providing it audibly, then we would have to provide some type of audio description of what's happening on the screen. It would actually, like if I just showed the slide and then was talking about something completely different, or we're not discussing the slide itself, then someone would have to cut in and actually provide some type of audio description of what was going on. But fortunately, I'm providing that. If I put that slide on the web, yes, I would have to describe the image. But the way I describe the image, you're saying if I put this document on the web?
Yeah.
Yes. If I put this document on the web, it's considered a non-text element. So it would fall under the A, called text tags. I just have to provide information textually, whether it's alternate text in the background or visible text on the screen. That would be treated as multimedia if it included audio. So if, say for example, I'm looking at a webcast of this presentation or a live broadcast of this presentation which included audio, then yes, it would be treated as multimedia, which means they would have to have synchronized captioning. And hopefully the audio description would be sufficient from me. But most times I would suggest the speaker provide as much information as possible. Most times if you're doing a live webcast, it's generally enough where you don't need audio descriptions. It's not always the case. And you really can't tell when it's live. But if you were then to rebroadcast later, you would definitely have to add audio descriptions if you felt that the speaker didn't provide enough information to be able to tell what's going on behind them. You would have to add audio descriptions post.
In a multimedia presentation like this one,
Mm-hmm.
you never mentioned the picture. The http://picture. You never mentioned it.
Right.
Do you have to have some kind of canned mention of it, or is the fact that it's not essential to the presentation, so you just ignore it?
That's a good question. So your question is, because there's a picture up there, do I need to then audio describe the picture alone? Was that what you were asking as well?
Yeah, that's kind of, I didn't ask it as well.
Okay, all right. Well, the answer to that is you have to decide as the author or the creator of the multimedia presentation, is that essential? Is it essential for the person viewing it to know what's on that picture? That's what you have to determine as the creator. If I were creating this multimedia presentation, that picture is really decoration. It's really to kind of keep you interested as I'm going through the presentation. That's why I put it there, actually, as the author of the presentation. Just to keep your eyes on something else while I'm talking as well. Because I know when I'm sitting in the audience, it's easy to get distracted if there's not something else to take my attention for a moment, relevant. But it's not really relevant to what the slides are about, not fully. Now, if it were providing a significant amount of information and I didn't speak to that, yes, you would have to add some type of audio description of what's going on. Again, most of these are at the discretion of the creator, the authors. Even when we're going to talk about electronic documents in a later session, and whether or not how descriptive you are with your textual information or your alternate text, it's all at the discretion of the author. So, and it's about what point you're trying to get across. All right. Great questions, by the way. Thank you. As far as color cannot be the sole, just like software, color cannot be the sole means of conveying any type of information. Readability. You just want to make sure that your documents, your websites are in a nice, simple, nice readable format without style sheets. Server-side image maps, client-side image maps, these standards are the epitome of outdated because I don't think I've seen a server-side image map since 1998. So basically it says that if you have a server-side image map, it needs to be accessible, and you want to use a client-side image map whenever possible. As far as data tables, just make sure your headers are clearly defined. So you have row headers across the top, column headers across the top, row headers across the side. Those just need to be clearly defined, and there's markup for that for HTML and other ways to do that with electronic documents. Also, if you have multiple levels of headers, oftentimes you'll see multiple levels of headers. We'll have a presentation a little bit later where you'll see that. You just have to make sure that the data cells are programmatically associated with the header cells. And again, I'll show you a lot of that in our demonstration a little later. Frames. Anyone know what a frame is? Show of hands. No? Frame on a website. You know what that is? Basically, 2 pages on one. It's 2 different pages on one page. Sometimes people will have a navigation frame, and then they'll have a content frame. Basically, you just have to title those. So if you have a navigation frame, you just title them, and there's markup that you can use. Same thing with your content frame. You just title it content frame. That way, someone going from frame to frame knows where they are if they can't actually see. In addition to that, every web page is a single frame. So each web page needs to be titled to facilitate navigation as well. Flicker rate, we talked about that with software, and that's going to be consistent through all the technical standards. Text-only alternative, if there's no other way to make your web page or document compliant, you need to provide a text-only version with equivalent functionality. And it has to be updated. Scripts. I know you've seen JavaScript and JavaScripting and a lot of different scripting. Websites have come a really long way since 2000. Basically, you just have to make sure that text is available to assistive technology. And the best way to do that is make sure it's keyboard accessible. That doesn't guarantee that text is accessible, but it's probably the best way to check quickly. Applets and plugins. You may have a PDF document on your website. You just have to make sure, since it requires a PDF reader or some other reader, something outside of just the browser, to view the page, you just have to have a link to the applet or plugin. Electronic forms, they just need to be labeled to facilitate navigation and completion. And the navigation links. What that means is we have a lot of pages, a lot of websites have these navigation links on the side or across the top, and they're repeated on every single page. Well, if you can imagine someone using a screen reader or some other device, every time they get to a page, they have to come across those links, and they have to listen to that every single page, next page, every single page, and then they finally get to the content. You as a user, you pull up your page, you already know their navigation links, you look immediately at the content that you're trying to get to. Well, that's what we want to be able to do for them. So there's a link at the top of the page that would take a user directly to the main content, or at least past the navigation links. All right. Now there's a bunch of standards for telecommunications products, making sure we have TTY connections, microphones are correct, time interval alerts, the caller ID is accessible, volume controls, transmitting. A lot of these, the controls of keys are accessible. If you think of your phone today, most people are using some type of voice over IP phone. Even if you go think about your home phone, if you have some type of cable service or if you have some type of internet service, your phone is actually being run through the internet service now. It's not a typical phone line anymore. So a lot of these standards are already outdated. So the good thing is this refresh is coming and will help us with that. But we still have to follow these standards, and there has been some guidance from the Access Board on exactly how to do that. We talked about web, and there is a standard in the web standards specifically for multimedia, but there's also separate standards for multimedia itself. A and B basically is just saying that your TVs or devices have to have some type of captioning decoder or some type of audio description circuitry so that C&D will work. And C&D says that video and multimedia productions need to have some type of captioning or and also audio descriptions. Pretty much what we talked about earlier. Now, self-contained closed products. These are your ATMs, your fax machines. If you have an information kiosk in your center area, just want to make sure it's usable. We talked about timed responses. Make sure the touch screens and controls are accessible. Biometric forms and user ID. Like this computer I have here, this has a biometric ID. Just do my fingerprint and it logs me on. Well, the great thing is it has an alternate means of access where I can just type in my passcode if I need to. Because it's quite possible that I'll lose my hand at some point. Hopefully that doesn't happen. All right. Of course, we talked about color coding, color and contrast settings, screen flicker, and the controls need to be accessible. And for desktop and portable computers, controls and keys need to be accessible. Most times you just want a tactile. Touch screens and controls. Again, the biometric user ID. And all the connection points on your computer just need to be standard connections, whatever industry standard is. Now, this standard subpart C, the functional performance criteria. Basically, if you've complied with all the technical standards and for some reason your website, whatever it is still not accessible, it's probably because these would probably still cover it. At least one, and I'm going to read through these. I'm going to read very slowly so that you kind of get the gist of what it's saying, because honestly, if you listen to it, it's pretty self-explanatory. At least one mode of operation and information retrieval that does not require user vision shall be provided, or support for assistive technology by people who are blind or visually impaired shall be provided. At least one mode of operation information retrieval that does not require visual acuity greater than 2070 shall be provided in audio and enlarged print output working together independently, or support for assistive technology used by people who are visually impaired shall be provided. At least one mode of operation and information retrieval that does not require user hearing shall be provided, or support for assistive technology used by people who are deaf or hard of hearing shall be provided. Where audio information is important for the use of a product, at least one mode of operation and information retrieval shall be provided in an enhanced auditory fashion or support for assistive hearing devices shall be provided. At least one mode of operation information retrieval that does not require user speech shall be provided, or support for assistive technology used by people with disabilities shall be provided. At least one mode of operation and information retrieval that does not require fine motor control or simultaneous actions, meaning two hands at once, and that is operable with limited reach and strength shall be provided. Now, if you've complied or conformed to the technical standards for the specific technology, in most cases, you've already met these. These are for those gray areas where there's some questions or your uncertainty. But in most cases, if you've complied with the technical standards, you should be fine. Subpart D, 1194.41, information, documentation, and support. Product support documentation provided to end users shall be made available in alternate formats upon request at no additional cost, no additional charge. End users shall have access to a description of the accessibility and compatibility features of products in alternate formats or alternate methods upon request at no additional charge. This is basically saying that you have to provide accessible user guides. That's in essence of what it's saying. Support service for products shall accommodate the communication needs of end users with disabilities. This is talking about your help desk. You know, if you call the help desk, they've got to be able to communicate with people with disabilities. In the upcoming standards, and I've seen a draft of it, doesn't mean that that's actually what's going to come out, but they've made an expansion on the help desk where they also have to be able to provide guidance and help to people with disabilities on whatever, like for example, if you're calling about a password or something like that, or if you're calling about a particular application that you're having problems with, the help desk support should also be able to advise a disabled user how to use that application or how to access information with that application. Again, those standards are not out yet, and there's still a possibility they could be removed, but in one of the most recent drafts I've seen, that was in there. These are the tools, NASA standard 2804. We actually added a few tools, suggested tools for you to use. The suggested tools for screen reading software, for Windows PC is JAWS 8.0 or higher, Windows Eyes 6.0 or higher. For the Mac operating system, you would use VoiceOver, which is actually the screen reading software that's included on the Mac operating system. Now, if you're using desktop automated software, this is actually for review of, say, for example, websites. These are the suggested software you might use for Section 508 compliance. High Software ACC Verify. It's a pretty good tool. It's actually a little bit outdated at this point. But DQ Ramp is another option. For the Mac operating system, DQ Ramp we found works cross-platform. PDF documents, Adobe Acrobat 8.0 or higher. There's also the option of using NetCentric Technologies' Common Look plugin for Acrobat. It's basically, if anyone here has ever used Dreamweaver, it's especially for tables and other difficult things in PDF, it provides a visual means of repairing the documents for compliance. It's a pretty good tool. Acrobat may be sufficient in most cases, though. Windows 7's narrator is better. It's actually very good. Anything before is not as extensive as it needs to be for the average blind user. But it has, like I said, you're right, every year it does get better. Matter of fact, Windows 7's accessibility features have improved drastically over XP and Vista. But I wouldn't consider it sufficient at this point for someone who's blind.
Yeah, for rapid use.
Oh, absolutely. If you were, say, for example, you wanted to just check your website or check a page to see how a screen reader would read through it. Now, I wouldn't use it for testing for compliance, but it's a good tool to be able to get an idea of what what a person using a screen reader would see or hear. Yes?
So the PDFs, is this a document that has been converted from, say, Windows? What if you have a document that was scanned in?
A scanned document, a scanned PDF? A scanned PDF, and you'd like to know how that's handled?
Readers would work with that.
A screen reader does not work with the scanned PDF very well at all. Because it's basically, as she's saying, is an image. So it's treated as a non-text element. But if you can imagine, that's a lot of alternate text that you have to pretty much retype. Acrobat actually uses what's called an optical character recognition software, which is included in Acrobat. You can use that, and it will read, depending on the quality of the scan, it will actually transfer the letters into actual text. I suggest a very good scanner. Otherwise, you'll be doing a lot of actual editing of the text, which is possible as well. But scanned documents, I would suggest avoiding them when possible. It's usually better if you have, say, for example, a native document like Word or Excel or some other native document, to use those and then convert. as opposed to, say, for example, printing it, then running it through some type of PDF converter. That's probably the worst way to go with that. But again, it can be done. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's not the best way to do it. Yes, sir.
I think what you neglected to say is that the Adobe Reader can speak.
Yes.
Right, and it's best if it comes from text.
Yes. He was just saying that the Adobe Reader has an option, Adobe Reader and Adobe Acrobat has an option called Read Out Loud. And it can actually read the text, just like a screen reader. So you can use that as well. All right, some other useful tools. We have Firefox. I like to use this Wave add-on. It's actually by WebAIM. I would definitely suggest it for anyone wanting to do a quick review of a website. Very simple tool to use. There's also a web developer toolbar, which you can test for some of the Section 508 standards. There's also an Internet Explorer accessibility toolbar. So we definitely suggest these. If you're reviewing software, there's a bit of information that is provided through the operating system. Tools like this UI accessibility checker pretty much tells you what's coming through the operating system. And this is actually for, I believe it's only for Windows. But the link is there. And then, of course, we talked about Adobe Acrobat. These are our resources that we suggest. We have section 508.nasa.gov. You can actually go there and get a lot of information. There's a lot of NASA-specific information. You just have to be on the NASA network to access it. We have our virtual help desk, section 508 help@nasa.gov. That's available to NASA employees and contractors. And then, of course, section 508.gov. I'm sure plenty of, if you know section 508, you know that. And then www.access-board.gov, where you can actually take a look at the technical standards. There's also a great guide to the standards, so if you have specific questions. Matter of fact, a lot of the information that I provide here and more of the technical information are just taken straight from the Access Board's guidance itself. So no need to reinvent the wheel, just pass on the information.